Welcome to Mediation Playbook, the podcast that provides winning negotiation strategies. Join us as we explore the world of holistic negotiation from experts across business and industry. Our guests will share with us their insights and draw on their experiences to provide you the techniques and tools you need to become a master negotiator. Now let's get started. Welcome to Mediation Playbook. And today's episode, we're going to be speaking with Kevin Almosch, who is with us from Pine Financial Group. Kevin, why don't you get started? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got going with Pine Financial Group.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me on. I'm hoping to provide some value to you and your listeners. We had our initial call, a little warm-up call, and I got to say, I'm really excited about this episode here. So I got started pretty young. I was just getting out of the military and I purchased my first home. I did that because I knew I wanted to start investing in real estate because all of the books were telling me to invest in real estate, right? So I bought the first house, moved into it, moved out of it 2 years later. And I actually used a student loan, which I did not need for college. I used that as a down payment on my second house. So I was able to get my first no money down transaction. And then I kept my first house as a rental. And I just saw the appreciation going up. I saw the cash flow coming in every month, which was a decent amount at that time. And then I saw the tenant paying off my mortgage for me. And I was like, holy cow, man, this actually works. So I decided then, David, that this is going to be the vehicle that I use to build my wealth. And so I decided then, and I just focused in on it. So there I was, 23 years old, and didn't really know what I was doing quite yet. I just knew it was going to work. So then I just started networking and advertising and meeting people and talking to anybody that would listen. And I started to figure it out and started buying 1 or 2 houses every single month while I was still in school. And I did that for years and years up until the 2008 crash. The credit crash got me. So I think I mentioned this to you. I had 55 rental homes at the time. Almost all of them are single family homes and condos when I entered into that crash. So that was a very devastating and humbling experience for me. But that was also the time that I started Pine Financial Group. So I was working with a partner at the time, and she was freaking out over the economy and she wanted to get out and teach real estate. I like to do real estate. So we just decided to separate. And I started Pine Financial Group. So it's been a great almost 16 years now. Pine Financial is a private money lender helping real estate investors, which is exactly what I love to do.
Great. So tell me a little bit more about what it is that you guys do in terms of the transactions and how they're structured, so we can kind of set the stage for a discussion here around the negotiations that you've been involved in your perspective.
Yeah, so it's a private money lender, or hard money lender, some people would call it. So it's those two terms are used interchangeably. So we just raise private capital from individual investors, maybe like you, and we loan that money out to real estate investors that are doing some repositioning. So think about your fix and flip projects. Maybe it's a buy, fix it, and refinance and hold it as a rental property. Maybe it's a repositioning of a commercial asset. We're seeing a lot of that right now. So it's very creative, non-bank, non-traditional type financing.
Right. So that means you must be involved in a lot of different negotiations on a lot of different sides of deals.
Oh, it's crazy. Negotiation is so important. Even in being a parent, like I find myself in negotiating with my own kids constantly, right? So, negotiation is everywhere.
So tell me about some of that. Do you have anything that jumps to mind in terms of those conversations on either side, either with investors in terms of putting deals together, or in terms of meeting with individual, whether it's homeowners or whomever, whether in their living rooms or in the boardroom, or kind of tell me about a story or two of things that you've run into that have been interesting situations where it really made you think, how am I going to approach this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so take you back, I said I was buying 1 or 2 houses every month while I was in school. Well, look, I didn't have money. My refrigerator had a keg in it, and that was it. Like I didn't have food. I was, how it is when you're trying to get your career going. So how was I able to buy 1 or 2 houses a month without any money or credit? The way I was able to do it is by getting into people's homes, their living rooms, when the sellers needed to sell. So think of like job transfers or financial pressures, divorces. Probate was a big one that I did a lot of negotiation with, but it's really getting into the home where I could talk directly with the seller of the house and try to come up with a terms that would meet my needs to make profit and their needs of solving their problem. So it was a ton of fun just getting better and better meeting with people in their living rooms. And the one that comes to mind when you say that, her name was Julie. And it's very, very sad. A lot of these are sad, but she had a son with autism, and she was basically the breadwinner of the household. Her husband wasn't doing well financially, so she was trying to figure out how to support her autistic child, right? And she thought she could do that by buying a bunch of rental properties. So she just bought a whole bunch of them. I think she had 11 or 12. And when what you figure out when you're actually in this business is it's very, very difficult to make a living on rental income. Your big profits come as of house appreciates in value and how you pay off your loan. So it's a very slow process. It's guaranteed to make you rich. I really do believe that, but it's a slow process. And she thought it was going to be quick. So she just got herself into trouble. And then she started renting properties for less than what she was paying on her mortgage. And she was just going backwards. So I was able to help. I stepped in. I took over two of the 11, the two biggest problems for her. She just deeded me the house, and I started making the payments on her loan for her. So we call that buying subject to the existing financing. And it saved her credit. It saved probably her marriage, quite honestly. And I just will not forget this, David. She gave me the biggest hug with tears in her eyes as we were able to work through this together.
Yeah. Do you find that a lot in those kinds of situations where people have gotten in over their head? Because, that's a situation where obviously she had very good reasons, but she got into an investment where she was in over her head, right? It wasn't in a personal home. Do you find that regularly with people who get into this kind of business?
Oh gosh, it's all over the board. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones where I bought a house and it was their investment. The first one that comes to mind that I'm thinking of right now is it was an inherited property and the tenant was his father. So, now he owned it, but they didn't have a relationship. He wanted his father out, but he couldn't kick his dad out, right? So
did he inherit it from like a grandparent, an earlier generation kind of a situation?
I don't remember how he got it into title, but I do remember he wasn't willing to evict his dad.
Yeah. Sure. Reasonable.
He sold it to me so I could evict his dad, right? So that was his problem that I solved for him.
Interesting. And so let me ask, when you're in these negotiations, do you find that folks are coming to you necessarily with a problem, a solution in mind, or do you find that they'll come to you looking for, say, maybe they're looking for money for their own investment, and then through that conversation, you're seeing different opportunities? Well, I can't continue to throw good money after bad because your plan isn't working for you. But what if we did it a different way?
Well, there's two sides here. So what we're talking about right now, David, is when I'm trying to buy houses from motivated sellers. So there could be a wide range of why they're motivated. Sometimes it's a foreclosure, or sometimes it's a tired landlord, all of those different things, right? So are they getting in over their head? Yeah, possibly. Or maybe something happened to them. Life happened to them, right? So now on the investor side is Pine Financial Group. When we bring in private investors, I could tell you this is the most rewarding business I could have found myself into, because it really is a true win-win-win. I make money, so I'm not going to hide that, but I also get to help passive investors earn a high return, and I get to help real estate investors fund their projects, right? So there's really all three of us winning. And I'm thinking of Maria right now, who was referred to me from her sister, Karina. And Maria, she was really trying to figure out how to retire, but she just couldn't. She invested just a little bit of money with me. I think it was like $100,000, and then waited a year to see how that went. Really, really liked it, and then pushed in more chips to the point where she was able to retire. So because of the investment with us, she was able to quit her job and what she was working so hard to do, and she did it comfortably. I love that story because I ended up capturing that in a testimonial video, and I could just see it when she's telling her story, how impactful that was for her.
Right. So have you found that there's been tough situations in terms of reaching these deals or negotiations? Is it primarily motivated sellers, or do you find situations where you see a value that someone may not, and you have to make it apparent for them?
So that it could be either way, but from my experience, it was more the motivated sellers. And the reason for that probably is because that's what I was targeting, right? Like I knew that probate created motivation because kids fight over money, right? So I know that I could solve this problem by buying the house, and so they could split up the proceeds. So one of the lists that I targeted was probate houses. That was a nice, easy problem for me to go ahead and solve.
So you got a list, what, from the county or something like that of probate filings, and then looked up the addresses and said, all right, let me fire off a letter and see if somebody's interested?
Yeah, I mean, I had to build the list. You could go buy the list. They're for sale. I didn't know that, nor did I have money to do that. So I would just go to the library, and all the probates are listed in the public. It's all public notifications through advertisement. So they have to advertise in the local papers. And it's just a notice to creditors. So they're notifying all creditors of this estate that we're going to be settling the estate, right? So I just went to the library and I went to all the local papers, hand wrote down all the leads, and then I built my list and I started sending them letters.
Interesting. All right. Well, I definitely like to hear stories like that, where it's just a little bit of the elbow grease, you know what I mean, to build up the business and get things rolling. So tell me, what's going on in your business these days? What's kind of the hot topic in the industry for you guys at the moment?
Yeah, I think the hottest topic right now is that NAR settlement, the National Association of Realtors. I mean, obviously, interest rates is another big topic, but you and I talked briefly about the NAR settlement and what impact that is going to have on the industry. Is it going to impact investors, realtors, home sellers? Like, what is going on with that? So I think that's maybe what we should talk about.
Sure, yeah. Well, tell me. Well, why don't you give kind of an overview for our listeners who may not be familiar with what exactly happened there?
Yeah, so there was a lawsuit, class action against NAR and a group of other entities, right? The large brokerage firms. And the reason for the lawsuit was they felt that there was unfair treatment towards buyers and sellers when it comes to real estate commissions. And so it's like, are you price fixing these? Are you overpaying for what value you're getting? And then there was also the concern that there's a fiduciary responsibility, right? So if you represent a buyer or seller, your responsibility is to them. But there was concern that there was steering, and people were steering to or away from houses because of commissions that are being paid. So that's all part of the lawsuit. Now, NAR decided, they haven't said they did anything wrong, but they have decided it's best for them and their members to settle the case. So it's a big nut. It's like $400 something million payment, which is actually significantly less than it originally was. But it's a big payment, which I don't know how they're going to afford to pay that, quite honestly.
I also don't know. I mean, I'm presuming that that's primarily going to be funded by the large brokerage houses that are involved. But I don't know what that shakes out to when you think about the number of transactions that are in scope for the period that's in scope. You know, is everybody going to get a check for 27 cents kind of a deal? I don't know how that's going to shake out.
It's so big, right? I have no idea. I don't know where the money is going to come from. Is it going to start coming off of like added to commission? Or I mean, it sounds like it's probably going to be the members, NAR members, is carry the big load of that. But in any case, that's only a small piece of it. What is what's going to happen to the industry is what everyone's wondering, and there's still so many questions about this. But it's a 108-page settlement, right? So it's huge, but there's very few actual changes to the industry. One of them being, you can't list a commission in the MLS. So one of the confusion points here is, can the seller still pay a buyer's commission? Well, the answer to that question is yes. In fact, I would guess that's how it's going to go going forward. Like if I'm a buyer, I might say, okay, I'm going to buy this house. I want to pay $100,000, but I want my agent to be paid 3%. So I want them to get $3,000. I'm just going to offer $103,000, and I'm going to ask the seller, hey, kick back $3,000 to my agent.
Oh, as part of the offers. So rather than it being dictated, because as I understand it, the way it has worked is the seller in their listing on the MLS, that multiple listing service, which individual groups of realtors will have in local communities or parts of town and larger metro areas. That MLS listing will say, you know, we're the seller, we're offering this home, 2 beds, 1 bath, whatever, and we will pay 3% commission to the buyer's agent. So there it's the seller dictating what that price is. Now what you're saying is that because they can't list that last piece anymore of what the potential buyer agent's commission could be, they're going to instead have it where because the buyer's agent is still sitting there needing to get paid on the transaction.
That's right. Yeah.
So the buyer's agent who is writing up the offer for the buyer is going to say, hey, you want to bid 100,000 for this house? Let's write it up as 103, dictating that 3% is going to come from the seller, which leaves the seller's agent open, though, to potentially doing a lot of work and not getting paid on it. I mean, well, not getting paid if the transaction doesn't close, which has always been the case, but also not getting paid on it if I, as a buyer, have you as my buyer's agent show me around, show me all of these homes, and then I end up not going through you, because is there no longer a buyer's agent exclusive arrangement allowed, or is that still permitted?
Yeah, it's still permitted. In fact, it's even worse. It's like required. So before a buyer's agent can unlock a door, they have to have that buyer's agreement in place. And inside that buyer's agreement has to specify the commission. So it's not necessarily amount. It could be a flat amount. It could be a percentage of the sale price. It could be a percent of something else. It could be an hourly rate, but it has to be clearly defined what it is or how it's going to be calculated. So you can't be like, whatever the seller's agent's willing to pay me, that's what I'll take as my commission. No, it has to be clearly calculated. But what I don't know for sure is, can you amend that agreement once you know what the seller is willing to offer? That's an interesting piece that I'm not sure about.
Per the terms of the NAR settlement, you mean, what the requirements there are?
Right. Well, it's just you have to have that agreement in place. So that's the second big change. So no advertising the commission in the MLS, and then you have to have the agreement in place before you can unlock a door. So that's a little bit of a shakeup, right? But what we're going to see is sellers, listing agents probably work a little bit harder because they're going to be unlocking doors more, even if they're not representing the buyer. And then a buyer's agents, I could see easily being more of a desk job, just help with the negotiation, help with the representation, maybe not charge quite as much, right? That's what I'm thinking might happen.
But now what this does is creates a situation, whereas previously the buyer agent's exclusive said, the commission, you're going to go exclusively through me. I'm going to show you around, taking all these open houses and the like, but I'm going to get paid based off of what the seller dictates for the sale. Now, I, as the buyer's agent, have to begin a negotiation with my client as to what I'm going to get paid, and then turn around and represent my client's interests as their fiduciary.
That's right. So that's where the negotiation comes in. So buyer's agents are going to be the largest group impacted by this. And you're going to see that thin out, I'm sure. But the ones that stick around and survive are the ones that are very good at showing their value, right? And good at negotiating. Because you're right. You're exactly right, David. They have to negotiate their commission before they can unlock a door.
That's interesting. And then it creates an odd dynamic, because at first you're negotiating with the buyer. And so you're having to explain how the business works especially if it's a new buyer, first time home buyer, and then turn around and say, okay, I'm going to be here advocating for you, but first I have to advocate for myself as against you.
That's what attorneys do, though, right?
I mean, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of situations where you do have to negotiate with a client off the top, right? I mean, if you're doing it with investors by a different stripe. I think the difference is that in many of those situations that I can think of, initially you have a sophisticated counterparty, right? So when you're dealing with investors, for example, you're dealing with people who are reasonably sophisticated, who are understanding the market and the investment. Here, we're talking about people who may be younger, they may be buying their first home, they may not necessarily be aware and may not have a full understanding of how the business works. And yet they're out there, they're trying to do the right thing, right? They're trying to get into a home, same as what you were doing, when you're still in college, right? But yet that's a lot to put on those folks. It sounds like to me.
Yeah, so I said that I think the biggest group that's going to get hurt is buyer's agents, or the biggest impact is buyer's agents. I do believe that. The biggest risk, though, is the buyers, for the reason that you're saying, because they may not understand that they don't have to pay the commission, that it could still be negotiated into the deal, right? They might think that they have to pay it, and maybe they can't afford it. I think I read like over 60% of first-time home buyers need some kind of seller contribution or seller concession to even qualify for their loan. So if they need a concession like to help pay closing costs to even qualify for the loan, how are they going to afford to pay a commission? And if they don't understand that they can't negotiate it in, they may either one, go unrepresented, which could be a big trouble, or exit the market completely, right? So I think those are the two not negative impacts if the buyer doesn't understand. That's why we need buyer's agents that do understand and that know how to negotiate and can educate their client.
That's interesting, because I actually thought those two scenarios you said of what could happen with the buyers, right? One is they go unrepresented, or two, they exit the market. My initial thought was, well, we're going to see a lot of them exiting the market, right? Because if you tell me I have to pay, look, if market is 25 grand for the broker's commission, right? Because we're talking about buying a first time home, and you tell me I got to pay 25 grand in order to buy this, and then I also got to pay for the home. I'm doing the math there. If I don't understand how it all gets rolled into the mortgage, or et cetera, then I may be sitting there going, I can't afford that. I can't even begin to have the conversation.
Right. And here's the opportunity. If you're a listing agent and you're doing open houses, because I don't believe you have to have the agreement, buyer's agreement, to allow someone to walk through a house that you have listed. So is that even a better way now to pick up buyer clients?
The unrepresented buyer,
because you're one-on-one with them, and now you can talk to them and educate them on how this all works. Here's something that I do want to point out before we get off the topic, though, is the FHA. FHA loans have already announced, and this thing doesn't even roll out until the end of July, right? FHA has already announced we are not going to consider any seller paid buyer agent commission. I hope I didn't lose anyone there. Seller paying a buyer's agent. FHA is not going to consider that in the concession, because FHA has a 6% concession limit, or you don't qualify for the loan. You can only have the seller contribute up to 6% of the transaction. Well, they've already announced we're not going to consider any commissions in that 6%.
Which seems like a signal flare, really.
Exactly right. So it tells me that we're probably just going to go back to the status quo. It's going to be a little shakeup, and then a little over time, well, the sellers are going to be paying the commission again, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that that's where it's going to end up in terms of what happens in terms of the individual transactions, and we'll build up there. But the problem is that on the way there, there's going to be a shakeup, and then it's a situation where there's a lot of opportunity for buyers to be hurt, such as when you say, the seller's agent who's there, who's picking them up. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily, I got to be honest, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, because then the seller's agent is still having to sign an agreement, and they're still having a fiduciary duty to the buyer, right? In fact, they are going to have to disclose that to the seller and the buyer, right? So the buyer is going to understand what they're getting into with that. But I do wonder the buyers who won't be able to, who will exit the market, and if there's going to be a negative impact there. But I'm sure that buyers agents will get creative in terms of getting those folks back into the market, figuring out ways to structure deals that can ensure that they still get the buyer's time and can get them into a home.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. It's going to be a little bumpy, because it's a change. Whenever there's change, it's bumpy. It's not a significant change, I don't believe, but it is a change, and people are not used to it. So how are we going to navigate? And I should mention this. You can't advertise a seller paid commission in the MLS. That's it. It doesn't say I can't set up a website for my property and advertise a commission on that website. Right? So we're probably going to see, I wouldn't be surprised if we see NAR create a website that's not the MLS.
Well, I mean, Does NAR even have to, right? Because I mean, I presume that the vast majority of property listings in America are on some other website besides just the MLS, whether it's a property that has an individual domain, domain address created for it, or it's just on the realtor's own page in terms of a listing of various offerings. And to your point, you can put it up there. Well, that's certainly going to be interesting. A lot of negotiation opportunities there, and it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out, especially when you're dealing with less sophisticated negotiators in those buyer situations. Tell me about something in your business. What's kind of a commonly held belief about negotiations that is something you disagree with, that you really just passionately do not agree with and think that others have dead wrong?
Yeah. So you hear about this law of duality. And what that basically means is you can't have one thing without another. So I can't have a left arm if I don't have a right arm. In that case, I would just have arm, right? So you need one to have the other. Well, the problem with that mindset in negotiations is if you believe there's going to be a winner, that means that there has to be a loser. You can't have a winner without a loser. I think that is so off, so off. And I proved it with the stories with Julia, for example. I mean, I was able to really impact her life in a positive way and make money doing it. Right. And she was probably going to start defaulting on that loan within a month or two. Right. And then what happens? Then it's just a big spiral down. Right. So I believe that you don't have to have a winner and a loser in a negotiation. I really believe you could have a winner and a winner in a negotiation.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that a lot of the kind of win-lose mentality comes from this, what I like to call this Hollywood idea of negotiation, right? A lot of people, if they don't know how to enter a negotiation, and mostly that's about not knowing how to plan for what they're going to do in a negotiation. There's the idea around the tough guy or strong negotiator, tough guy, tough gal, whatever, however you want to characterize it, who is simply, I'm going to throw out a number, I'm going to stick to it no matter what. And that somehow that shows strength as a negotiator because you're going to make the other side bow to the pressure that you're going to apply. But that's dependent on having that pressure to apply, right? Because as you know, so often it's a situation where, okay, but you don't have the leverage that you think you have. And you end up missing a deal and you're leaving value on the table because you didn't plan for it. I think that's really where a lot of that mentality comes from in my experience of what I've seen with mediations I've seen, where you have individuals who are in a situation that they're not necessarily comfortable with, that's not their regular day-to-day business. And so they fall back on what they think strong negotiation looks like, or I should say what they think good negotiation looks like must be strong negotiation, not understanding that it requires a little bit more finesse than they prepared to bring to the table. I mean, has that been similar to your experience?
Yeah, and I know you brought up mediation. That's a whole different world than what we're talking about here with real estate negotiation. I've been through my fair share of mediations too, and one of my favorite attorneys told me once that you're not supposed to feel good about a mediation. Like everybody loses in that, right? So you have to give up enough to make it work to not feel good about it. Now, in real estate negotiations, I think everyone can feel good about it. Now, you bring up the example of strong arm, like this is my price, I'm not going lower, and just hammer that, right? Fantastic. Well, that's a terrible strategy, by the way. But if that's your strategy, it's still a win-win because they have an offer that they didn't have before on their house. They could say yes or no. At least they have an option now when they didn't have an option before. Now, if it's too low of an offer, they're just going to say no. And they say, right? I mean, that's what I would do. So I'm not going to be hard on someone if that's their strategy. And if it's either take it or leave it type of thing, well, that's great. Now I have an option, right? I think it's much better to figure out what the needs are, what the pain points are, and find a way to solve that and get what you want, because there's ways to do it.
Right. Tell me a little bit about your planning when you go into a negotiation, to one of these kind of situations. What do you do to prepare yourself?
Well, it's a very systematic process, right? So it's a sales process. So negotiation is a sales process. And so if you go through the 5 steps, we learn about these in sales books, right? We want to try to eliminate any maybes. So we want a yes or a no. So we have some type of upfront agreement. And I can walk through that with you if you like, how I would do it. And then you got to go through some needs analysis, like what's going on with your situation and where is the pain point? What is it that you need? And then you get into your offer, then handling the objections, the close, and then the objections, right? But we go through the very specific process every single time, and that's how you get good at it, right? Practicing this process over and over, the words that you're going to use, the questions you're going to ask, to draw out what it is that they're needing in the situation.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit. So what are some of those questions, or what might be some of the questions you ask? Like, give me a scenario that, be creative.
Yeah. So I really like what we call negative phrasing. Have you heard the term, David?
I have. I'm familiar with it, but please explain for the listeners.
I love negative phrasing. And it works really well in real estate negotiations. So what I'm trying to do, if I want to buy a house, in this example, I want to buy a house, I need to eliminate their other options, right? Well, what are their options? They could list it with a realtor. They could sell it on their own, FSBO, for sale by owner. They could rent it with a management company, or they could rent it on their own. Those are their 4 options. Or they could just not do anything, put their head in the sand. But we're going to take that off the table. So it's really 4 options to fix their problem. If I can eliminate those 4, then I'm the only one standing. So what do you think they're going to do? They're going to sell to me. But I don't want to necessarily bad talk anybody or tell them why they shouldn't list it with a realtor.
Or bad talk enough to give them a reason to say, oh, wait a minute, he's just bad mouthing them. Let me dismiss what he has to say. That's a fine line.
But I'm truly trying to find the best solution for them. And I'm talking to people that I've targeted in my marketing that I think I could help. So I believe I am the best solution, but sometimes I'm not. Sometimes they actually do need to list it with a realtor. And in that case, I would refer it over. So if I'm going to eliminate those, I might say, so what is it you hoping I could do for you today? That's the question I always ask, right? After I do the upfront agreement. Okay, so what is it you're hoping I could do? Well, buy my house. That's always the answer. Buy my house. Great. What else have you tried? And then I'm going to start digging, and then they're going to lead me to which of those 4 they've already tried. Well, have you thought about listing it with a realtor? I heard that their commissions are super fair and it's probably not too much for you to pay, And so I'm planting the seed that the commission's high and that they don't want to pay that commission. But I'm not saying that commission's high. I'm saying it's probably pretty low. And then they're going to come back to me and start talking me into why they don't want to list it with a realtor. Oh, why don't you just have a management company help you rent it out for a while? I think they guarantee that they're going to find a tenant and there's not going to be any vacancies, so you don't have to worry about the payment pressure anymore. Is that right? Is that how you understand it? And then they're going, no, that's not how I understand it. They need 10% and they don't pay anything if it's vacant, right? So they start educating me. So that's how I would do it.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, it is a great approach, and it's useful in so many different contexts, right? When you're trying to get somebody to commit to something, because I suspect that you're in a situation where with a lot of these folks, it's a big decision, perhaps one of their biggest decisions. And because of that, there's a lot of hesitation. And so it's a great technique for overcoming that hesitation, where even if it is, to your point, it may be the best choice for them, but because it's such a big decision, there's going to be hesitation around that. That's natural, that discomfort, right? So addressing that discomfort.
If you turn it around and they try to sell you, like let's say I say, well, what if I could do whatever it is? I'm going to make an offer. What if I could take over your payments and you could be done with the problem forever? Was that something we should talk about, or maybe you hate that idea? No, I don't hate that idea. Oh, really? Okay. Well, what about me taking over your payments even works for you? And now they're going to tell me why I need to take over their payments, right? So I'm trying to get them to sell me.
Right. Exactly. That's great. Well, Kevin, I appreciate you taking the time here. I do have one last question I'd like to ask our guests who come on, and that is, can you tell me about something in pop culture that you've seen, whether it's a movie, TV show, otherwise, something that, something you were a fan of or that you thought was interesting, but being in your business, you've come to realize that's not how it works at all, that you've seen behind the curtain, so to speak, and it's just ruined it for you?
Yeah. Have you seen, HD was it HGTV? Is that what it is? All the home flipping shows, flipping Boston, flipping Vegas, all of those. Yeah, those are actually they're fun to watch, right? They're very entertaining.
Absolutely.
And they're a bunch of BS is what it is. It's so funny because they always run into a problem and they always turn out okay, right? But that's not real life. What real life is well, we actually have costs involved, not just in the construction. We have to borrow money to do the project, and we have holding costs. We have utility bills. We have insurance payments. And they don't talk about any of that, right? So it's a fun entertainment show, but take it for what it's worth. It's not education. It's entertainment, and real life flipping properties does not go down like it does on TV.
No, it's interesting. I've noticed that too. And when you watch, you try and watch carefully and rewind back. So two things. One, they won't end up, there'll be something that will get kind of glazed over as to where some extra cash came from. Right. A lot of times what happens is, they adjusted their budget and they magically have 50 grand more. And you're like, where'd that come from? Well, it came from the producers who need to make this episode work. And they already have the footage from 3 days or 3 weeks or whatever. So like, fine, throw 50 grand at it, just make it go away. But the second thing is, you're right, the carrying costs, right? So if you're a family who moves, there's some home, we're going to remodel it, you move out, you're living somewhere else for a month, and now you're living there for another month because of the delay in construction. Somehow that budget that pops up on screen does not include that additional month, the additional costs of eating out for that month, the additional utilities, et cetera, all those other things that are very difficult to quantify. And I've noticed that as well. And for me, it's more of a game of figuring out how are they going to explain it away. That's the entertainment for me, right?
I feel like I haven't watched one of those shows in so long. Now I feel like I need to go back and watch one and pick up on what you're doing, what you're saying here.
Check it out. You'll see. But anyways, well, Kevin, thanks again for taking the time. Really appreciate you coming on. Really appreciate the conversation. Your website is thepinereport.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, the website for Pine Financial Group. So if you're interested in borrowing money or investing in a private fund, it's pinefinancialgroup.com. So the pinereport.com is where I wrote a report. It's actually pretty in-depth, detailed report about the 1990 housing crash and what's going on to today. Because I get questions constantly. Is this another 2008? Is the housing market going to explode? Are we going to lose all of our money? No, I don't believe so. And the reason is because it doesn't resemble the 2008 crisis. What it resembles is 1990. So I went back to that recession where housing did go down in value because of the recession and what's going on right now. So I wrote that report to help people understand how to navigate the economy today. And that's the report I'm giving away for free at thepinereport.com.
Got it. Okay, great. Well, any last words before we sign off here?
I got to say, I had a lot of fun talking about NAR and negotiation. I do love negotiation an awful lot, and I love real estate as well. So I appreciate you bringing me on and allowing me to talk about those two things.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Kevin. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Also, for those of you who are attorneys, don't forget to check out the website, mediationplaybook.com. because you can be getting MCLE credit for listening to this podcast, aside from the great content such as with guys like Kevin. All right. Thank you so much. Take care. Thanks for tuning in. If you found our show valuable, please subscribe to our YouTube channel for exclusive video content. We love hearing our listeners' thoughts and suggestions on guests or topics for future episodes. So please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or comment on Spotify, and we will catch you on the next one.